All right, to make this rant a little bit more interesting, let's incorporate a game. How many times did I say the word like? Go. All right, so I just wanted to talk about something. Yes, I'm still wearing pajamas. Yes, it's pretty bright. Can you blame me? I mean, it's only 3:30. Pajamas are an all-day thing. But I wanted to get this out really quick because I was talking to somebody about this on a forum earlier, and co-op horror games. There aren't many of them, and there's a huge market for it, and there's a huge, I guess you could say, demand for it. But there aren't really that many out there that are, I want to say fully produced games. Like there's a bunch of betas out for things like Slendy Tubbies and Survivors and all of that stuff, and Gmod's got certain maps going, and there are a few paid co-op horror games, but there's nothing like, I don't know, it feels like there's nothing dedicated to co-op horror. I feel like it's difficult, like, for people to make horror games. Like, I feel like there's three probably main, like, issues with it. Like, the first one would be if you put a second person, like, into a co-op horror game or into a horror game, period, right? If you add a second person, you kind of lose a little bit of horror. It's more or less like a known fact that if you add a second person to a horror game, it goes from being scary to more or less funny, because you see it in, I don't know. When you're alone, you feel more like isolated with the game. There's a bigger sense of being alone, and the atmospheric effects take more effect on you, and just the being chased aspect takes more effect on you in the dark and all the other things, right? But as soon as you add like a second person to that element, it becomes like, where can we find issues with this game? How can we laugh at it? Let's make it funny in order to get rid of our fear and stuff like that. It's probably not like an issue so much with the game as it is with just like human psychology. When there's more than one of us in a scary situation, it's easier to remain calm, I guess. True, I feel like if you can do it right, and you can utterly terrify one person, then that fear becomes contagious, and like that second person will be just as terrified, if not more so. I feel like if you can do it right to the point where you can make that fear contagious, then you've made like the perfect co-op horror game. I mean, the second thing is the concept, I guess. Like most horror games have an objective, like collect items to achieve this goal or collect this many pages, etc., etc. Like, what would the concept be? Because I feel like if it was like a race to see who can finish or escape first, or who can collect this many pages first, I mean, you add that competitive aspect, and you definitely lose fear. Like, it goes from, I don't know, goes from Amnesia to Mario Kart. Just, you got somebody running through the level trying to be the first one, and it's just not scary anymore. As for how the monster would work as well, like, or the enemy or whatever, like, how do you ensure that it chases like one person, or chases each person equally? Like, it would either have to chase them both equally, or there'd have to be two of them. And if there's two of them, I feel like it's not as much of a co-op game, because I don't know, it's like two single player games playing side by side. As for like storylines, like, you can't make a single player horror game and then add a multiplayer aspect to that. Like, you'd have to make, I don't know, a dedicated co-op. I mean, you could. I mean, I'm saying for like a dedicated, like for something that was mainly co-op horror. You can't have like, oh, here's your main protagonist, or here's your main character. Oh, suddenly there's two of them. Suddenly there's two monsters, and I don't know. Story just doesn't really make sense. I mean, if you've got a storyline that's good, and like a really good horror game has a good storyline, or at least some sort of storyline. And if you kind of twist it just to incorporate a multiplayer mode, I feel like it's a little stretched. I guess a third aspect, and the third aspect is programming, I guess, like the way the game runs, or just game mechanics in general. Things like, I don't know, I mean, most horror games have little like token tricks that are unique to their game. Like, I don't know, little, I don't know, like how the monster follows you, why it follows you, etc., etc. And I guess that becomes more difficult with two players, like getting that to not clash, or making sure that things don't break down, there are no bugs, things don't get stuck, etc., etc. I don't really know anything about programming or developing or anything. I'm trying to take it logically here. I guess there's a lot of issues with incorporating two players. There's a lot more variables, especially with things like randomly generated maps, I guess. Because I guess if you've got a map where you're running across a maze kind of deal, and in front of you is generating randomly and behind you is disappearing as you go. If you get two people, like, they get far enough away from each other, they're each on separate paths now. And then I guess those two paths could intercept, and it would be like, I don't know, the one path goes this way, one path goes this way, and then they're just kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. One player is just dead. And I guess that just kind of turns into Tron with something evilly chasing you, which, to be fair, isn't a bad concept. And I'm not sure why it doesn't exist already. Okay, but yeah. But I mean, probably the biggest thing is that, like, a co-op horror game is a risk. Like, it's a big risk for a developer. Like, you make a single player horror game. You don't have to worry about too many variables. You use the fundamentals. You use the basics. Here's your storyline. Here's your objective. Here's your monster. Here's your maze, right? That's it. You've done it. That's more or less a successful horror game, right? You take co-op, you're taking into account a lot of variables. One, can you scare both people? Two, can your horror stand up to two people? Like, will it go from horror to comedy because there's two people playing? Like, will it just become funny? Things like that. I mean, it's more difficult to make a co-op horror game. And that's understood, but, like, I feel like if there was a dedicated, like, team or dedicated game just to co-op horror, and they dedicated everything to co-op horror, like, where it was just the main focus. The whole game was co-op horror. There was no single player mode, no nothing, just co-op horror. I feel like they could achieve that. But again, it's a lot of resources, it's a lot of dedication, it's a big risk as well, especially for, like, indie developers or small developers, not huge teams that have huge funding and stuff like that. And yeah, that's more or less all I wanted to say. What do you think? Tell me in the comments below. See you next time.